Okay, everyone, let's get started. Well, hello, my name is Kayla, and I'm a tutor at ACC. And today I'm going to go over some study habits that all of you can use to help you in your studies. So I have some slides that I want to show you, so let me bring those up right now. Okay, so the title of this um, presentation is Simple Study Habits for Success. And we're going to go over several things. We're going to go over note-taking, reading strategies to use when you're listening to recorded lectures, and how to study materials for the course. And at the end, we're going to talk about time management, which is very important when you're taking online classes. Okay, so here's some methods for note-taking. When I take notes, what I normally do is I will write. Normally, when I make notes, I write them on notebook paper. So I, I like to use real notebook paper when I make my notes. And what I'll do is I'll write a little black circle, and this will be the main idea of the reading or lecture or the major topic that I'm focusing on when I'm taking notes. And underneath that, I will put little dashes with explanations of what the supporting details are in the reading or lecture. And I'll typically make about 8 or 10 of them for one main idea. And what you can do for these is just to explain the meaning of the details and how they relate to the main idea in your lectures or reading. And you want to also write down anything that jumps out to you as being important. Usually when I make lecture notes or notes on the readings, I'll have several of these main ideas and little dashes filled with supporting details. For longer readings, what I like to do is add another big circle and then add a brief summary of what I learned in the reading, or more like what I wrote down in my notes from the reading or lecture to kind of help me to consolidate my knowledge of, of the notes that I made to help me understand them better. Another method of note-taking that you can use is called the Cornell Method. What you do for this method is you take a blank sheet of paper that is college ruled, and you're going to divide up the paper into 3 sections. This section is called the notes column, and it's going to be about 6 inches long. And in here, you're going to write main lecture notes for your lecture or readings. You want to use very short sentences that really just get to the meaning of what you're trying to understand. And be sure to use abbreviations also and little symbols so that way you don't have to write out many different sentences. And a good way to organize notes in the notes column on the Cornell method is with bullet points, very similar to the method that I just showed you, because that will help you to keep your sentences shorter and help you to flow through the lecture or reading better. And you want to use this notes column only when you're taking notes from a lecture or a reading. Now, this part of the Cornell note method is the Q column, and it's going to be about 2 inches wide. What you're going to put in here is main ideas that you learned while you were taking while you were doing the reading or the lecture. And then you want to think of questions that will connect the ideas in this part of the Cornell notes to what you learned. So that can be something like, how did A influence B, or something similar to that. And this section is probably not really big enough for you to put diagrams, but if it was a small diagram, you could make a small little picture of what it might be. And you also want to put study prompts in here, such as if your professor is going to have you write essays in your lecture, you might want to put the study prompts in there so that as you're reading your Cornell notes later, you'll be able to look at those study prompts along with the notes from your lecture, and you'll be able to start thinking about what kind of prompt you want to use to create a class essay. You should make this part of the Cornell note after class while you're reviewing your notes. And finally, the last part of the Cornell method is the summary column, and it's always at the bottom right here. It's about 2 inches tall. And what you want to do here is you want to summarize what you learned in the notes column. So you want to write the main idea and what the supporting sentences in your notes column mean. You want to come up with a summary of what you learned over here. And this can be used as a reference while you're reading your notes later to help you get the gist of what this part of the lecture was about. And if you come up with any sort of ideas about, or your own personal thoughts about the content and what the larger meaning of it might be, you should also put that in the summary column, because those kinds of understandings are very important for when you are writing papers later on. And this is also going to be especially important when you're reading your notes later. So what I like to do with my own notes is I like to summarize. Let's say that you have a 30-page reading that you have to do. Well, it's going to be very time-consuming for you to write down everything that you learned from that chapter. So instead of focusing on remembering everything, focus on the main idea of that chapter, and then the details that led you to learn that was the main idea. And the summaries don't have to be very long, but they should be long enough that you'll comprehensively understand the chapter without having to go through every little detail. And I also use many abbreviations in my notes, as we discussed earlier, for the Cornell method. And like for example, the word political, a lot of times what I'll use is POL, because that's just how I say political when I'm writing my notes. Or like democracy, that's another word I have to write a lot. I'll put DEMOC, stand for democracy. And your abbreviations will be pretty tailored to you, so they should be something that you can understand and remember. Because I know sometimes I've made abbreviations and I don't know what they mean sometimes. So it's very important that you make abbreviations that you know what they mean, but are also short enough to help you write your notes faster. And like I said before, use your lecture notes and your reading notes to help you come up with your own conclusions about the concepts that you're learning. And this is going to be very important when you are taking tests and when you're especially writing papers, because a lot of the times you'll have to take the knowledge that you just learned and create something new out of it. So if you can start to think about what you think about the knowledge that you learned and create your own ideas about it, that's going to go a long way to helping you when you have other assignments. Okay, reading strategies. Reading is one of the biggest parts of taking a college class. And sometimes readings can be very daunting. So what you should do is you should set aside time to read uninterrupted. And what I like to do is I like to set a timer for how long I'm going to read. And this can also help you to find that time to read uninterrupted if you set a time for it. Now, as far as actually reading the the readings for your class, you should break it up into smaller sets. For example, let's say that you have 40 pages to read in a week. That sounds like a lot, and it is, but you can manage it in a variety of ways. Let's say that you need to read these 40 pages and you have an essay due on those 40 pages at the end of the week. And you want to have some time to plan your essay during that week. Well, what you should do is divide those 40 pages into 2 days of reading and read 20 pages a day. That's one way you can do it. Or let's say that you have a little more time to do your reading and maybe you don't have an essay, but maybe you're a little busy. Maybe you have work or kids or other engagements that you need to take care of. So you don't have as much time to block out as much time for reading. Well, you can finish those 40 pages in 4 days if you read just 10 pages a day. So as you can see, if you break it up into smaller chunks, it becomes much more manageable and you'll see yourself progressing through the reading throughout the week that you have to do it. Now, a lot of times you'll be told you should use reading strategies to help you read faster or things like that. I don't really recommend that because if you just start reading faster and you haven't really practiced it, you're not really going to get a whole lot of comprehension of what you just read. So I recommend you read at your own pace because if you do that, then you'll certainly comprehend it and you'll be able to follow it easier that way. And what I like to do is use my finger to point to the words as I read them. So just like I'm doing with the cursor right now. And that actually helps you to read faster. So if you are concerned about not reading fast enough, that can definitely help you. I've seen that help me read faster. And one thing that will help you before you even begin to read is if you skim the pages before reading. Just go through each page that you have to read. Let's say you had 40 pages, like in the last example. And just quickly run your eyes through all the pages. And as you do that, you're going to pick up on words because you can see them. And you're going to develop an idea of what is in those pages. And that's going to give you some idea of what you're going to encounter as you read, and that can help you to be more alert as you're reading and pick up on certain concepts. And another thing that is also helpful is that sometimes you have pages or chapters in textbooks where you don't need to read everything in the textbook. And this is a little harder to determine. This is something you definitely want to ask your professor about. But certain things, you might be able to skip certain parts of the chapters if your professor does not want to focus on those things in the chapter. But you definitely want to ask the professor about that first. Because if you don't need to read everything in the chapter, then it's not really a good use of your time for you to read everything. So that's something to keep in mind. And as always, after reading, take notes on what you read. Now, I recommend taking notes right after you read, but I understand sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes that's not possible for me. So just make sure that you do it the same day, preferably right after. And that's using the note-taking strategies that we just mentioned, and especially summarizing what you read. Listening to lectures. I know that virtually everyone at ACC is online now. So you're obviously not going to be in person, most of you listening to lectures. But you might have video lectures where the professor recorded it and wants you to watch it. So one of the things you should do when you are listening to lectures is listen for words like 1, 2, and 3. Sometimes professors will use these to indicate the 3 or so important topics from a lecture that they want you to focus on. And pauses, those are also important. If the professor explains a concept and then pauses, they want you to realize that that's a very important part of their lecture and to kind of basically think about it a little bit. And repeating, professors will also repeat what they just said. That's also a way that they emphasize that this is an important concept. And also by emphasizing specific words, especially if they will take a concept and explain it to you a little bit more, then that's also something you need to take note of. After you've watched the lecture, try to review notes the same day. This is especially important for the Cornell method because in the notes section of your Cornell method, you should flesh out more details than your 1 or 2 sentences. So that's important for that method. And also, for the other method, it's also good to review your notes after the lectures, just so that you can add any more details or any more insights that you have come up with by thinking about the lecture. Okay. And lastly, for listening to lectures, this is especially important for recorded lectures. Do not, and this is something I really want you to focus on, do not stop the recording to write your notes. I have done this before, and it's actually a bad habit of mine that I do this. But when you do that, it makes the lectures a lot longer than what they need to be. And so a 40-minute lecture could easily turn into a 2-hour lecture, and no one wants to deal with that. So it's best if you play the recording and let it go through just as if it was a real lecture and write your notes that way. And if you need to stop occasionally, then that's fine, but don't make it a habit because it will definitely eat up your time during the day and your time for studying, and no one really wants that. How to study materials for the course. Well, the basic plan for studying your materials for your course, for tests and assignments, is to reread your lecture and reading notes. Now, the way you can do this, because as you go along in your courses, your pile of notes and lecture is going to get bigger and bigger. So what you'll want to do is take one set of reading notes and one set of lecture notes and read both of them read one set of each of them every day. So let's say, for example, lecture 1 notes and chapter 1 notes from your textbook. Read those the same day, especially because they usually tie together, so it's nice to read them the same day so you can keep the content the same. And then the next day, read lecture 2 notes and chapter 2 notes, and then so on and so on. And when you get to the end, like let's say you have 3 lectures and 3 chapters you have to read before your test. After you're done with chapter 3 readings and lecture 3 readings, start back at number 1, and then you just go through them until the test day. And I've seen a lot of success doing this in my own studying and with other people. So I really think that this is primarily the best way to study for the test. And it's also good for studying for assignments such as readings, because if you're exposed to that content every day, you're going to start thinking about it in your mind and also solidifying your knowledge of it, which will definitely help you when you start to create something new from that knowledge. A lot of people like to make flashcards, and if you like to do that, I encourage you to do that. That can be important for learning topics. So if you want to make flashcards, then go ahead and do it. Oops. Sorry about that. And I know that a lot of students have asked me about how to prepare for like tests. So one thing I tell them to do is to test themselves by asking questions on the material that they've studied, such as why is A an important process of B? And based on your studying of the notes, you're going to build up this retention of this knowledge based on from your readings and your lectures. So you're not going to be totally in the dark when you have to answer this question. You're going to have the learning that is already in your brain that you have accumulated over this time. As you read the notes, you'll begin to remember it, and you can try answering these types of questions without looking at the notes. And normally, I find that I'm very able to do this, and the other people are able to. It really helps other people to do that as well. If you have questions about the content that you learned in the course, definitely ask your professor. And sometimes it is intimidating to email professors, especially because they're very busy, and sometimes it might be inconvenient. But usually professors are very accommodating to answering questions, and they'll typically get back to you within 24 to 48 hours for sure. So they're definitely a good resource if you're having trouble understanding something. And also, if you feel like you need more help to understand certain concepts, you can get tutoring from the ACC tutors. And this is the link here that you can click in order to get there. So you can write that down if you'd like. Time management. Time management is especially important for online courses. And I know that students have told me, and I have heard stories of students before, who the dynamic of an online class is very different from being in person. You don't have a lot of accountability. There's no one who's going to hold you responsible if you didn't come to class or do the readings. So one of the things that you can do to help you with that is to know the due dates for your assignments. This is probably one of the biggest time management things that you need to know, especially for online classes, because if you know when your due dates are, then you can plan when you're going to read your when you're going to read your textbook, listen to the lectures, and read your notes. And you're going to be able to start to plan how you're going to organize this online course so that you can succeed in it. And plan what you need to accomplish each week. Now, this can be kind of challenging because sometimes people have schedules that don't change very much. But sometimes people have schedules that change a lot. So you can really make a plan that's flexible to fit your needs as you need it to be. Such as, let's say, in 2 weeks, you have a test and you also need to write a paper that's in 2 weeks as well. Well, what you could do is you could organize that you're going to read the textbook during the first week and do the lecture during the first week. And you're going to read your notes. And then the second week, you're going to start planning in your essay what you're going to say. And you're also going to start asking yourselves questions about the readings and the lectures so that you can prepare for those questions that you'll encounter on your test. So that's just kind of a general idea of how you might plan it out. It's also important with online courses to work on the courses each day. And that can mean, let's say that you're really busy one day, maybe you work on your courses a little bit a little bit. If you have more time one day, you work a little bit more. But just be sure to work on them each day. And one of the things you can do when you're just starting is to set up 1 or 2 hour blocks of time to study for your classes. And you can adjust that time. So if you find that you get your studying done for that day sooner than 1 hour, that's fine. Sooner than 2 hours, that's fine. Or maybe you need to break up the studying time into blocks throughout the day instead of doing it all at one time. And another thing that might help you to while you're studying is to take little idle periods in the day to study. Like For example, if you're waiting for your coffee at Starbucks, or maybe you're waiting for a delivery of some type, like maybe you ordered a meal and you're waiting for it to come. You can study your notes or do lectures or readings while you're waiting for that. Also, if you go to if you happen to be going to an appointment where you have to wait in a waiting room, this is also a really good time to study. And if you find that you need help to figure out how to manage your time studying, you can see a tutor or a counselor, and they can help you with that. And another fun thing that I'm gonna tell you about is the Pomodoro timer. And in just a couple minutes, I'm actually going to show you what it looks like. The Pomodoro timer is a timer that is made for studying. It starts out with 25 minutes of studying. And then after that 25 minutes is over, you have a 5-minute break. And then after that 5-minute break's over, you have another 25 minutes of studying. And this will go on in intervals about, I think, 5 times. Then after your last 25 minutes, you get a 15-minute break. So it's a fun way to reward yourself for studying. And I've used it and it's definitely helped me. So I'm going to exit out of this and I'm going to show you what the Pomodoro timer actually looks like. Okay, this is the Pomodoro timer. And you can do the traditional 25-minute, or you can even create a custom timer where maybe you want intervals of 30 minutes and 10 minutes, or any kind of combination in between. Let's just click on this so you can see it in action. So this is what it will look like. It's counting down. You can pause it if you need to. You can restart it if you need to, like that. And it also has a little alarm that lets you know when your break and your studying intervals begin and end. And you can change it to all different kinds. Well, that's all that I have to tell you about the study habits for today. Thank you very much for coming, and on behalf of Austin Community College, I wish you great success with your studies.